Hey everyone, I'm Steve Wade, a cloud native catalyst. Can you hear me all right, by the way? Yeah? Okay. So I'm a recovering awkward person. So for many years, I've been lucky enough to work with a number of different organizations as a consultant. And I've seen firsthand how communication can affect both positively and negatively within an organization. So what I want to do is I want to start with a couple of questions because you've all just carb loaded on pizza and a bunch of stuff. So we're going to make this a bit more interactive. So hands up if you've been held back professionally due to communication challenges. And then keep your hand up if you've seen other people's ideas not be taken forward because they couldn't communicate them effectively. Right, now look around the room. It's basically almost all of you. So what I truly believe is the ability to be able to communicate effectively is way more important in today's world than learning any programming language or any concept. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So I'll take questions at the end, scan the QR codes, add your questions. You can upvote them and downvote them. I'll do them in priority order. I'll also try and get out of the way. Add your name when you ask a question, because then it'll make it a bit more personal when I can directly communicate with you. 3, 2, 1. So let's start with a percentage. So 77% of engineering projects fail, not because of any technical challenges, but simply because there's a communication breakdown somewhere. So I want to introduce you to Sarah. Sarah used to work in my team. She was a platform engineer, and her job was to solve our ongoing platform performance issues. She was a very senior engineer. Code was absolutely pristine. Architecture was incredible, right? The project didn't go anywhere. The project didn't go anywhere because she couldn't communicate the value to the stakeholders, right? Why are we going to spend a couple of months trying to build this thing out? What's the value in it? So it was this kind of technical masterpiece that was completely lost in translation, right? But what if I told you if we started to think and use the skills that we had as engineers and just repurpose them a little bit, we can actually become exceptional communicators. So engineers are fascinating creatures. I'm an engineer myself. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm fascinating, but we're interesting creatures because we can talk to machines in multiple different languages, right? And we're fluent in these kind of conversations. And we have the ability to be able to create thousands of applications that can connect billions of people together. But I guarantee you that you probably struggle to be able to talk to the person sat right next to you. And why is that? The reason why that is because we spend hours optimizing our code. We'll debug issues with resilient persistence. When was the last time you debugged a conversation? When was the last time you optimized your communication patterns up and down, left or right? We probably don't. The paradox is that we're great at talking to computers, but we're actually novices when we talk to humans. So let me try something. In your head, on a scale of 1 to 10, rate your technical ability. Keep that number in your head. Now rate your communication skills. Got 2 numbers? Okay, let me show you something interesting. In my mind, I think if you're 10 out of 10 technically, but you communicate like a 3 out of 10, your perceived value to an organization is about a 5 out of 10. And I'm being probably nice here, right? So this isn't a theoretical exercise. This actually has drastic impacts into your career trajectory, but also how your contributions are valued within your organization. So here's a critical insight, right? The absence of words doesn't mean the absence of communication. What do I mean by that? What I'm saying is, when you're in a meeting and you have your arms crossed and maybe your legs wrapped one over the other, you're communicating. When someone comes to your desk and you're looking at your computer and they're talking to you, you're communicating. When you hold a conversation with someone and they're too busy trying to look at Twitter and work out what the latest thing Elon Musk is doing, they are communicating. And as engineers, we expect things to be explicit, right? We look at code, we look at documentation, we look at a specification. But the problem is that communication is not like that. It's multiple different channels happening simultaneously at the same time. And your strongest communication is actually not the words you say. You're all communicating with me right now and you're not saying anything. So let's think about communication as a technical stack, right? So we start with layer 1. Layer 1 is our nonverbal communication. That's our body language. That's the way that we use hand gestures. And then we have layer 2. That's our vocal delivery. So that's tone, pace, volume. Layer 3, verbal content. That's the words and how you structure them. And probably to me, number 4 is the most important, which is the context. How do I make sure that everybody that I'm talking to understands what I'm saying? So let's try something. I want you all to cross your arms. Now cross them the other way. A little bit challenging, right? Some of you are trying it multiple times. So here's the thing. Layer 1 in our stack is so deeply ingrained in our muscle memory. It takes a conscious effort to be able to change. However, it's probably one of the most important layers of the stack to be able to maintain and manage. So, like any technical stack, each layer builds upon the previous one. But like solutions and stacks in technology, if one layer fails, the whole entire stack fails. So let's debug why this happens. So hands up any of you that have gone into so much technical detail when you're talking to customers, clients, team members, that their eyes just glaze over and you're thinking, what the hell? No one's listening to what I'm saying. So that's poor overflow, right? In human communication terms. Or when you're speaking to a group of people and you expect them all to have the same context as you, but they don't. So that's not documenting your dependencies, right? Not collaborating and collectively communicating. But what's the root cause of this problem? And in my mind, I think it's this. Insecurities are very loud, but confidence is quiet. So when's the last time you've been into a meeting and you've gone in there, very senior level engineer or maybe a tech lead that you deeply respect? Do they spend time just taking over with technical jargon? Or do they just communicate very infrequently, but what they say is highly valuable and highly relevant? What I think is when people go and talk in a lot of technical detail, they're doing two things. One, they're trying to prove themselves. Or two, they're trying to actually cover up they don't really know what they're talking about. But if they keep vomiting this out, you'll eventually believe them, right? So true top confidence comes in two aspects: simplicity and clarity, right? But when you next go into a room and you have a conversation with somebody, maybe it's after this, maybe it's when you get back to the office, and you start talking a lot, think about whether you're actually sharing useful information or whether you're just doing the talk. You're just exposing your insecurities. We're going to come on to that a little bit later. So a couple of debugging techniques. One is what I call the triple P. So the idea here is that we're eventually going to get to the destination, but we're going to try multiple different attempts. So let me show you. We'll preview this. So I'm going to tell you a technique that allows my audience to be able to retain information better. Then I get a little bit more technical. So it creates multiple neural pathways by exposing customers and my audience to the same content through different cognitive approaches. Then I dumb it down a little bit. Think about it like a GPS system. When I'm driving and I'm navigating somewhere, I look maybe at Waze or Google Maps, or I look at the phone signs, or maybe I communicate and ask the passenger that sat next to me if we're going in the right direction. The same works in communication, right? The whole idea is that I get to the end destination, the user's mind. All of these may work, and you got what I was talking about. Hopefully one of them worked, but at the end, you got the answer. This is how I communicate with people, because I'm speaking with people potentially at different seniorities. So I cannot assume that everyone, from a contextual standpoint, knows what I'm talking about. So I talk about it in multiple layers. The other one is hand gestures. So when I say three things, I space them out: 1, 2, 3, right? And we think about that, that's called a visual anchor. The reason why we want to do this is because a picture speaks 1,000 words, or maybe 100 words, right? But you're never going to remember 100 words. But if I can use my hand gestures to actually build an image, you're going to watch my hands more than what I'm saying. So a prime example that I've seen before is that I give a talk and I keep my hands in my pockets for about 2 minutes. And you're more interested in what I'm doing with my hands in my pockets and am I fidgeting than listening to anything that I'm saying. So an interesting study that happened was when the world went COVID crazy and everyone went on Zoom, did you find it easier or more difficult to be able to communicate? Show of hands, easier. Show of hands, more difficult. Why? It's already read my mind. So essentially, there's multiple layers in which you can be in when you communicate with somebody. There's sexy time layer, which is about this close. There's personal space, which is about this close. And then there's kind of public space, which is down here. And then there's like miles at the back. How close is your face on Zoom when you join a meeting? You're in sexy time or personal space. Guaranteed. And the reason why people find that so off-putting is because it's like you're screaming in their face constantly. So you join a Zoom call and the person's face is there, you're like, oh shit. So one of the things that I would recommend is to just move your face further away from your webcam, zoom back out and give yourself space. And actually, when you join a call, the type of engagement that you have is actually very different and you've made a very subtle change, something to bear in mind. So I want to talk to you about something that kind of drastically changed how I communicate with people. It's a very simple question, but like any good function, its simplicity hides its power. So what you would have seen is when you meet new people, I bet a bunch of you today said, hey, what do you do? So that's like trying to understand a complex system by only looking at its current state. Or maybe you said, hey, how are you? You met someone that you haven't seen in a long time. That's a query that's so generic, it probably returns an empty string, right? But they're what I call conversation dead ends. The conversation ends after the person responds, right? You get results like good, thanks, fine, thanks, I'm a developer, I'm an engineer. But what ends up happening is you really have to think about the next question that you ask them, right? And you're basing the next question solely off of maybe one sentence they've responded with. Communication and the way that you build relationships with people is how well the conversation flows, right? So we need to have a conversation or a question that can enable people to be able to go in any different tangent. I'm going to give you it for free. This. Have you been working on anything exciting recently? Let me show you. Have you been working on anything exciting recently?
It's turning up and down.
So do you see what happened? The energy shifted. You couldn't see it here, but his eyes lit up, right? It wasn't a question. It was an invitation to share passion. I've given him a blank canvas and you could have gone wherever you wanted to go. I have a number of questions off the back of that. Some of them may be technical, some of them may be untechnical. And we can start flowing. So let's debug why I think this really works. Any good engineer, I will love debugging. So have you been present perfect tense over a period of time? Working on. I don't just want the outcome. I want to understand the effort that you've been on. I want to understand the processes. I can start to ask questions like, so what was the most difficult part of that migration? See, and then I can ask many questions off the back of that, right? What's your vendor? Who did you work with? Did you try a number of different vendors? There's many avenues that I can go on. This is the most important one. Anything. I don't care about work. If you want to talk about work, sure, talk about work. But maybe it's a pet project. Maybe it's something that you're doing with your family. Maybe it's a hobby that you have. Right? I'm opening the scope way broader than what you think I'm getting. When two engineers meet for the first time, 9 times out of 10, it's a transactional conversation. What do you do? Why do you not use Azure? Why do you use AWS? Or maybe, are you using Kubernetes? No, I'm using Nomad. Why? I don't know. And it's just a constant back and forward, and you're just playing verbal ping pong with each other. And you never really actually build a relationship. It's the whole thing's just transactional. Exciting. Hopefully, this gives positive emotional association. And then recently is hopefully something that's easily obtainable from their mind. So I'm going to propose that you go on a 30-day communication diet. The next time you meet somebody new or someone that you haven't seen in a long time, maybe that's an old team member or maybe an old family member, please God, do not say, hi, how are you? Or what have you been working on? Just stop. Start with the question, have you been working on anything exciting recently? And what I want you to do is I want you to document mentally or in written communication the types of interactions and conversations and information you get by asking that one question. And then look at it and correlate it with the types of information and conversations that you had when you didn't ask that question. And what you'll notice is a dramatic difference, because you'll actually get to know the person. You're not making assumptions about them. As soon as we ask the question, hey, what do you do? You're thinking, how much is that person worth? For example, I went into a customer once and I was working late. This was before I asked this question. Woman comes by. I said, hi, nice to meet you. What do you do? She says, oh, I'm the cleaner. Oh, well, shit, I have nothing in common with the cleaner. I don't clean. So the conversation kind of ends. However, I then, like 3 months later, when I went back, I asked her this question, and she races hamsters. I didn't even know racing hamsters was a thing. And then we had a crazy conversation about, I have a dog, and do you go dog racing, blah, 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 blah. But I would have never had anything to communicate with her if I didn't ask an open-ended question where she could go wherever she wanted. So this question is very, really simple, right? It's 8 words, right? But the great thing about this is, like any complex technical problem or topic, it's not going to take months to learn this, right? You can do this immediately, right now, when you walk out this room. You can ask this question. You're welcome. So let's get a little bit technical for a moment. When we start to think about an API, we expect certain things, and the same is true with a conversation. Inputs, hand gestures, body language, words, tone, pace. Processing, cognitive understanding, and emotional intelligence. And then finally, outputs, information, and hopefully some kind of connection. But like any good, clean API, if we give clean input, we're going to expect reliable output. If we document our endpoints, we make the integration with other people easier, right? Think about this as an API, but now start thinking about it as humans, right? So if we can document types of conversations that I have with person X, when I introduce person Y to person X, I know how to do the introduction. I know what they like. I know what they're interested in. Maybe Casey doesn't like to be talking to people that like Azure, so I'm obviously not going to introduce him to somebody that works at Microsoft, right? As an example. And then good error handling, right? If we have good error handling, we stop system failure, right? Knowing when certain types of conversations can get pretty ugly with people that hold certain types of things very close to their chest, right? Or they have very strongly held opinions. So let me demonstrate. I'm going to demonstrate a simple programming concept, and I'm not going to say a single word. Ready? Did you catch it? What was it? For loop. No line of code. No words are spoken from my mouth. Just hand gestures. The way that you communicate non-verbally is way more critical than the words that you actually say, because you've built a mental model in your head of what I was talking about. I can talk to somebody very senior or very junior, and if I try and use my hands and gesticulate a little bit more, they are more likely to be able to understand what I'm saying than if I just put my hands in my pockets and said, it's a complicated for loop. It starts from 1 to 3, and I'm going to lose a bunch of people. It's very powerful, but it's very underused. So every interaction is an API call to someone's understanding. But the question is, are you sending clean input, or are you sending malformed requests? So let's talk about scaling, right? We're all engineers. We all love scaling. Sometimes we do need to scale. Sometimes we don't. When I think of scaling, I think of 3 things. Think of modularity, think of testing, and I sometimes consider documentation, maybe. So let's start with modularity. Interesting study showed if you sit within 25 feet of a high performer, your own performance goes up by 15%. But here's the flip. If you sit in 25 feet of a low performer, your performance drops by 30%. Why? Because high performers know how to be able to communicate effectively with every member of their team. Who's been in a room with what I would call a low performer that just brings down the whole team, can't communicate effectively, is the person that you have to explain what this meeting's about when they've left the room, right? Or always come up to you. This is it in real life. So we try not to deploy untested code to production, right? But let's be honest, we all have. Me included. So why, when we launch critical conversations, do we just go head first immediately, right? Why do we not test these things out? So one of the things that I talk about a lot is this 5-second test. So the idea is, before I go into a critical conversation, maybe that be with an investor, maybe that be with a C-level executive, I talk how I'm going to talk to the C-suite. I talk to one person, hopefully a friendly face, but somebody that I have respect for and they have respect for me. Their job is 2 things. Hopefully to listen to everything that I'm saying and not gloss over. But secondly, they're going to respond back to me what I was talking about. If they can't do it in 5 seconds, I'm just giving them verbal diarrhea, right? Confidence comes with simplicity and clarity. If I can speak with simplicity and clarity, they can respond to me in 5 seconds. If they can't, you know that your message is probably not going to get across to the people that you're in the room with. Finally, we've talked a lot about verbal communication, but what about documentation? And I have this technique that I call the API doc. Clear endpoint. What's the main takeaway? This could be on an email, this could be on a document. Define my parameters. All I'm doing here is I'm defining the context. What do you need to understand before you read the 50-page, 10-page, multiple paragraph email? I include usage examples, right? Where am I basing this conversation from? Is it something that I've experienced before? Is it something that I've seen working with you? And then finally, I add error handling, right? This one is the one that's key. I try and understand who my audience is that's reading the document, and I add in any potential misunderstanding solutions into the document. Who's been in a meeting before, and then they end up having a meeting about the meeting in about a week or a day's time because the people in the meeting didn't understand what the meeting was about? Everybody. Right? If we just do things like this, we don't waste time in meetings, right? We can actually do everything asynchronously. And in the world that we live in today, everyone's asynchronous. So we just need to put more effort into the way that we communicate. It's not your customer's job to remember you, right? So all of us, we're great technically, we build wicked solutions, but we expect everybody to just understand our value immediately, right? But it's not our customer's job to do that. It's not our stakeholders' job to be able to understand why we're technically brilliant, but it's our obligation and responsibility to make sure they cannot forget us. That's how we leave a lasting value, right? When Steve leaves an organization or Casey leaves an organization, what's the legacy that he leaves or she leaves behind? And if we can't effectively communicate, we can never do this. No one understands 25,000 lines of Terraform. It's impossible. They can't see the value of that. You need to be able to explain the value to the customer. So let's talk numbers for a second. So I've worked with a number of companies, and I would say that the high performers were 40% career growth, 25% funnel. So we started this whole conversation with a paradox. I told you that we were great talking to computers, terrible talking to humans. But what I've shown you is actually, if we just repurpose the way that we do things technically, we can do them and be very efficient communicators. When we're efficient communicators, we don't just build better solutions, we build better futures. The conversation doesn't end here, right? I'll be around for the rest of the conference. Come up to me, ask that killer question on me. Hopefully I'll try and give you a unique answer for all of you. But one of the things I want to say is the best conversations don't happen on stages like this. They happen outside in the hallway when we're going to start to collaborate and connect. Yeah, I look forward to meeting you, and this light is blinding, so I'm going to move over here. Thanks so much.